The hospital had been abandoned for decades, yet the whispers surrounding it never faded. I stood at the rusted gates, my flashlight flickering slightly as if hesitant to illuminate what lay ahead. The air was thick, damp, with the scent of decay and something else. Something ancient, something wrong. My friends, Sam and Eric, stood beside me, their faces pale under the cold moonlight. None of us spoke for a moment, just staring at the looming structure, its shattered windows like black, hollow eyes watching our every move. "We shouldn't be here," Sam muttered, shifting uneasily. "We've come this far," Eric shot back. "We might as well see what's inside." I took a deep breath and stepped forward, pushing against the heavy double doors. They groaned in protest, but with one final shove, they gave way, revealing a yawning darkness beyond. The stench hit us immediately, a mixture of mold, rust, and something metallic. Blood? No, that was ridiculous. Our footsteps echoed as we entered, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence. The reception area was still intact, though covered in dust and grime. A broken wheelchair lay overturned near the entrance, its wheels frozen in time. Faded notices clung to the walls, their warnings lost to years of neglect. I ran my fingers over the edge of the counter, disturbing a thick layer of dust. "You hear that?" Sam whispered. I paused, straining my ears. The faintest rustling sound, like paper shifting or fabric brushing against a wall, seeped from the hallway ahead. It could have been the wind, but there was no wind inside. "Probably rats," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Eric, always the fearless one, walked ahead, his phone light cutting through the gloom. "This place is huge," he murmured, glancing at the faded directory hanging lopsided on the wall. "Main ward is down this hallway. Let's start there." We moved forward, our footsteps careful against the cracked tiles. A broken gurney lay in the middle of the hallway, its frame twisted as if something heavy had crashed onto it. The farther we walked, the colder it became. Not just physically. Something about the air felt heavier, pressing down on my chest. A door to our left stood ajar. The plaque beside it read Ward C, in peeling paint. Something about it made my stomach tighten. "Guys, I don't think we should go in there," I said, but Eric was already pushing the door open. Inside, rows of metal-framed beds lined the room, their mattresses missing, springs rusted and protruding like skeletal remains. Some of the beds had restraints still attached, their leather straps cracked with age. Faint stains marred the floor, too faded to tell if they were water damage or something else. Sam shivered. "This place gives me the creeps." Eric smirked. "That's kind of the point, isn't it?" I wasn't so sure anymore. The moment we had stepped into this room, I felt watched. My fingers twitched, my instinct screaming at me to turn around and leave. And then, a soft creak, not from us, from somewhere deeper in the ward. All three of us froze. My flashlight trembled slightly in my grip. Eric turned toward the sound, his phone light illuminating the farthest corner of the room. Nothing. "Old buildings make noises," Eric reasoned, but even he didn't sound convinced. Then something shifted in my peripheral vision. A shadow, too tall, too still, standing just beyond the doorway. My breath caught in my throat. I turned fully, shining my flashlight directly at the spot. Empty? "Let's just get what we came for and go," I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. Eric chuckled. "Relax, man. There's no one here but us." But as he spoke, a whisper, faint, almost lost in the silence, curled through the air. A single word. Leave. The air around us grew ice cold. Eric's chuckle died in his throat. I could see it in his eyes. The moment he realized we were no longer just scaring ourselves. Sam took a step back, her breath shallow. "Tell me you heard that," she whispered. I nodded. The word had been unmistakable. Leave. Not a gust of wind, not our imaginations. A voice, faint and strained, as if someone had whispered from just inches away. Maybe it came from outside, Eric said, but his voice lacked its usual bravado. We all knew that wasn't true. The doors were heavy, the walls thick. If there was a voice, it had come from inside the ward. A distant clatter echoed down the hallway. Someone, had moved. I swallowed hard. We should go. Eric hesitated, but even he seemed less sure now. Let's at least check that back room first. We're already here. I wanted to protest, to turn around and run, but my feet carried me forward, following him. The room at the far end of the ward had its door slightly ajar, and beyond it, only darkness. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing a series of cabinets along the walls, some with doors hanging open, their contents long forgotten. Crumbling patient files littered the floor, pages yellowed and brittle. Sam bent down and picked up one. Look at this. She held up a patient record, the name barely legible under layers of dust. Subject number 42. Status: transferred. Transferred where? I asked, scanning the page. No destination was listed. Just a series of scribbled notes, instructions that looked hastily written. Eric pulled open a rusted filing cabinet. The drawer screeched, resisting before finally giving way. Inside were more files, dozens, maybe hundreds, all marked with the same cryptic note. Transferred, but there were no dates, no hospital names. Just numbers, like these patients had been erased from existence. Sam shuddered. Something's not right. If they were transferred, why no records of where? I turned to another cabinet, this one locked. A quick tug told me it was jammed shut, but Eric, always the determined one, kicked it hard. The lock gave way, and the door swung open. Inside, beneath a pile of deteriorating folders, lay a bundle of old photographs. I picked one up carefully, brushing off the dust. It showed a hospital ward, much like the one we were in, but filled with patients, their faces blurred with age and time. Then I noticed something. The patients weren't just lying in their beds. They were restrained, straps binding their wrists and ankles. Some had their mouths covered, as if to keep them from screaming. What the hell was this place? Sam murmured, flipping through more pictures. A faint sound reached us. A whisper, or maybe a breath. Then another. Software weak, like someone sobbing. The sound drifted from beyond the room, down the hallway we had just come from. But it wasn't a single voice. It was many. A chorus of hushed, mournful cries. My blood turned to ice. We weren't alone. Eric backed toward the door, his confidence finally cracking. Let's go. Now. We moved quickly, stepping over broken debris and scattered papers. The crying grew louder, filling the empty halls, pressing against my skull. It wasn't human. Not anymore. We reached the doorway to the ward when I felt it. Something brushing against my arm. Cold, like fingers made of ice. I spun around, heart hammering, but there was nothing there. And then, in the dim light, I saw them, figures standing at the ends of the hallway, barely more than shadows, silent, watching. Their forms flickered like an old film, distorting, shifting. But the crying, God, the crying never stopped. A door slammed behind us, the echo reverberating through the walls. Sam screamed. Eric grabbed my arm and yanked me forward. Move! We ran. Through the hallway, past the rusted gurney, past the empty beds. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. As we neared the main entrance, the crying stopped. Just gone. The sudden silence was deafening. And then, just before we reached the exit, I heard it again. A single rasping whisper. We burst through the double doors, gasping for breath. The cold night air hitting us like a shock to the system. The weight of the hospital's suffocating atmosphere lifted slightly, but the dread in my chest remained. Sam was shaking, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, eyes darting back toward the entrance, as if expecting something, or someone, to follow. Eric bent over, hands on his knees, his breath coming in heavy gasps. "Tell me that wasn't real," he muttered. I couldn't. None of us could. I turned to look at the hospital, expecting nothing but an empty, decaying structure. But in the windows, those black, hollow eyes staring down at us. Something moved. Not a trick of the light, not our paranoia. Shadows shifted behind the cracked glass, formless, yet watching. And then, one by one, the lights inside flickered on. Every single window of the abandoned hospital glowed with a sickly yellow hue, as if the place had never been left behind, as if the patients still remained. Sam grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "We need to leave, now." I nodded, but something stopped me from turning away. A feeling, a presence, the distinct sensation of being called back. It was like an invisible thread had wrapped itself around my chest, tugging me toward the entrance. And then I saw her. At the far end of the hallway, just beyond the open doors, stood a girl. She was barely more than a silhouette, dressed in a hospital gown, her head tilted slightly to one side. Her bare feet hovered just above the ground. I couldn't move. I couldn't blink. Her eyes, black voids, endless and empty, locked onto mine. And then she whispered, "Help us." Who was she? What had happened to her? And why did I feel like this wasn't over? The road stretched out ahead of us, dark and empty. Yet every mile we put between ourselves and that cursed hospital felt like a struggle against something unseen. Eric gripped the steering wheel so tight, his knuckles turned white, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror every few seconds. Sam sat silent in the back seat, arms wrapped around herself, as if trying to disappear into the shadows. I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't truly escaped. The weight of that place still clung to me, heavy and suffocating, as if invisible hands were pressing down on my shoulders. The girl's voice echoed in my skull. "Help us." I turned to look out the window. The trees blurred past, their gnarled branches twisting like skeletal fingers against the night sky. But then, there, just beyond the tree line, I saw something, a figure, standing still, watching. I blinked, my breath catching in my throat. The figure was gone. A trick of the light, it had to be. "Hey," I whispered. "Did either of you see?" The car jolted violently. Eric swore, yanking the wheel as the tires skidded on the road. The entire car shuddered as if we'd just hit something, but there was nothing in sight. We came to a stop, the engine sputtering, the headlights flickering as an eerie silence settled over us. For a moment, none of us moved. Then Sam whispered, "Tell me that didn't just happen." Eric exhaled shakily. "Something's wrong with the car." I turned in my seat, heart pounding. The road behind us stretched into darkness, but the hospital was nowhere in sight. We should have been miles away by now. And yet, something felt wrong. Eric tried the ignition. The engine stuttered but wouldn't turn over. He cursed under his breath and tried again. Still nothing. The silence pressed in around us, thick and suffocating. I swallowed hard, reaching for my phone. No signal. Sam checked hers and shook her head. Mine's dead. I exhaled, trying to stay calm. Okay, maybe we just wait a few minutes, let the car rest, and... A thud. A slow, deliberate knock against the trunk. All three of us froze. Another knock. Then a third. I turned to Eric. His hands were still gripping the wheel, his breath ragged. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was rhythmic, taunting. Sam whimpered. We need to go. Eric reached for the door handle, but I grabbed his wrist. Are you crazy? I hissed. What else are we supposed to do? His voice was shaking. Just sit here and... The knocking stopped. Silence. A deep, unnatural silence that sent chills crawling up my spine. Then from just outside my window, something whispered. Get out. I flinched, nearly knocking over my flashlight. My breath got in my throat as I slowly turned my head. Outside the car, in the dim glow of the flickering headlights, stood a figure. The girl. Her head tilted, those dark, hollow eyes locked onto mine. Her mouth barely moved as she whispered again. Get out. Eric must have seen it too because he slammed his foot against the pedal. The car roared back to life, the tires screeching against the asphalt as we sped forward. I turned in my seat, watching as the figure faded into the night. We drove in silence, hearts pounding, breath shallow. And then, as we finally neared the edge of town, I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was the same time as when we had first entered the hospital, as if no time had passed at all.